Clara Mitchell was supposed to be dead. That's what the desert wanted. That's what the buzzards circling overhead were waiting for. 3 days ago, her world was fiddle music and campfire hymns, the gentle sway of a wagon heading for a new life in California. They were all so full of hope, a whole train of them, dreaming of gold and green valleys. Now her world was just the grit of sand between her teeth and a sun that burned without mercy. Her lips were cracked and bleeding. The canteen at her hip had been bone dry for what felt like a lifetime. Her fine leather boots were shredded ribbons, and the blue calico dress she'd been so proud of was a dusty, torn rag. Time had dissolved into a shimmering haze of heat and thirst. Was it hours or days since she'd seen another living soul? She couldn't be sure. The attack had come at dawn, a whirlwind of gunfire and screams. She'd been gathering kindling when the first shot rang out. Bandits, someone had shrieked, or maybe it was Apaches. In the chaos of dust and terror, it was impossible to tell. All she knew was the whine of bullets and the primal urge to run. So she ran. She ran until her lungs burned and the sounds of slaughter faded behind her. She ran until she was utterly, terrifyingly alone. Now the desert had swallowed her whole. Red rock formations clawed at the sky like the bones of ancient gods. In the distance, flat-top mesas stood like silent, uncaring witnesses to her slow demise. Her legs finally gave out near a cluster of barrel cacti. She collapsed to her knees, the impact sending a jolt of pain through her exhausted body. Her hands, already raw, left bloody prints in the sand. She tried to cry, but her body had no moisture left for tears. "Please," she whispered to the empty, endless sky. "Please, God." The only answer was the wind. It was picking up as evening approached, carrying the scent of sage and something else. Something wild. She thought of her mother, dead 10 years now. "We Mitchell women," Mama used to say, "we don't give up easy." But Mama had never been lost in a furnace of rock and sand, with vultures drawing patient circles above her. With a groan, Clara forced herself to stand. To stop moving was to die. She'd seen the bleached bones scattered across this land, grinning skulls that served as a final, grim welcome. She would not become another one. But as darkness began to creep across the sky, a new fear took hold. The men on the wagon train had told stories around the campfire. Stories of wolves, mountain lions, and things far worse. They spoke of the Apache, warriors who moved like shadows, who knew this land like the back of their hand. Warriors who, the stories said, showed no mercy. She pushed the thoughts away. Fear would kill her faster than thirst. The first star appeared, a cold, distant diamond, then another and another, until the sky was ablaze with a terrifying beauty she'd never known back east. Her foot caught in a hole, the burrow of some desert creature, and she went down hard. A searing pain shot through her ankle. This time, when she tried to get up, she couldn't. It was twisted, maybe broken. A wave of despair, cold and final, washed over her. This was it. This was the end. She crawled to a large rock and propped herself against it. The temperature was dropping fast. Desert nights were brutally cold. She had no blanket, no fire. Just a thin, torn dress against the coming chill. A coyote yipped in the distance, answered by another, and then a chorus. A pack. And they sounded close. Clara picked up a rock, a pathetic weapon, but it was all she had. Everything in this land was hungry. Everything was hunting or being hunted. And tonight, she was the prey. She closed her eyes, trying to remember a prayer. "The Lord is my shepherd." But the words felt hollow and meaningless here. Where were the green pastures? Where were the still waters? There was only rock and thorn and the chilling certainty that she would die here, alone and forgotten. She must have drifted off, lost in a fever dream of cool water and her mother's voice. But a sound jolted her awake. It wasn't the coyotes. It was the soft, steady thud of hooves on sand. A single horse, hope and terror, fought a war in her chest. It could be someone from the wagon train, a survivor searching for others, or it could be the bandits, coming back to finish the job, or it could be something worse. She pressed herself tight against the rock, trying to become invisible in the deep shadows. The hoofbeats grew closer, slow and deliberate. Then a figure came into view, silhouetted against the star-dusted sky. and Clara's heart stopped dead. Even in the darkness, she knew. This was no settler. This was no one from her world. The man sat on his horse as if he were part of it, his back ramrod straight. Long hair was bound by something that caught the faint starlight. The outline of a rifle was slung across his back, and knives hung at his belt. Apache. The word was a shard of ice in her blood. All the stories, all the warnings, all the campfire nightmares came rushing back in a single, paralyzing wave. She bit her lip to keep from screaming, the coppery taste of her own blood flooding her mouth. Maybe he would pass by. Maybe in the deep darkness, he wouldn't see her. But the horse stopped. The rider's head turned, and she knew with a certainty that stole the very breath from her lungs that he was looking straight at her. She couldn't see his face, not really, but she felt his gaze like a physical touch, a cold finger tracing the line of her fear. For a long, silent moment, the entire desert seemed to hold its breath. Even the coyotes had gone quiet. Then the rider dismounted. He moved with a fluid, silent grace that spoke of contained power and deadly skill. He walked toward her, and Clara raised her pathetic rock, her hand trembling so badly she could barely grip it. He stopped just beyond her reach. Now in the starlight, she could see him a little better. He was tall and lean, dressed in simple cloth and dark leather. A warrior. Every line of him screamed danger. This was it. This was how her story ended. Not from thirst, not from cold, but at the hands of an Apache warrior in the middle of nowhere. She thought of her mother one last time. We Mitchell women don't give up easy. Clara lifted her chin, meeting the darkness where she imagined his eyes were. If she was going to die, she would die brave. She would die a Mitchell. Do it then, she croaked, her voice a raw, broken thing. Just make it quick. The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. He was going to kill her. He was going to add her scalp to a collection. She knew it. Then he moved. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the knife, for the bullet, for the end. But death didn't come. Instead, she heard a sound that didn't make any sense. The soft, gentle sloshing of water. Her eyes flew open. The warrior was holding out a leather water pouch. His movement was slow, deliberate, the way a man might approach a frightened, wounded animal. Water. He was offering her water. Every instinct, every story she'd ever been told, screamed at her not to trust him. It was a trick. It had to be. But her body betrayed her. Her hands reached out, greedy and desperate, snatching the pouch before her mind could even process the act. The first cool drops on her cracked lips were a miracle, a resurrection. She drank, the water flooding her parched throat, chasing the ghost of death away. It was the most incredible thing she had ever tasted. Slowly, he said. Clara nearly dropped the pouch. He spoke English. His voice was deep and quiet, like distant thunder, with an accent she couldn't place. But it was English. She forced herself to drink more slowly, her mind reeling. As she drank, she studied him. He was younger than she first thought, maybe 30. His face was all sharp angles, carved by sun and wind, with high cheekbones and a jawline that could cut glass. His hair was as black as the night sky, bound with strips of cloth and what looked like eagle feathers. But it was his eyes that held her. Even in the dim light, she could see they were dark, watchful, and gave absolutely nothing away. He wore a simple cloth shirt and leather leggings with tall moccasins. A beaded belt circled his waist, holding pouches and a sheath knife. The rifle on his back was well-oiled and ready. This man was a walking weapon, and he had just saved her life. When she'd had enough, he gently took the pouch back. She watched him cap it, her mind a whirlwind of confusion. Why? Why hadn't he killed her? Everything she knew, everything she'd been told said the Apache were merciless savages. Demons, not men. But this man had just shared his most precious resource in the desert, with an enemy. Thank you, she whispered. The words felt small, inadequate. He just tilted his head, studying her with those unreadable eyes. She saw he had paint on his face, dark lines across his cheekbones. War paint. A fresh spike of fear lanced through her. You are alone, he said. It wasn't a question. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Should she tell him about the wagon train? About the attack? Would he care? Or would it just mark her as part of the invasion of his lands? He moved then, circling her slowly. She tensed, but he wasn't being threatening. He was assessing her, his gaze taking in the torn dress, the bloody hands, her swollen, useless ankle. Bandits? He asked. She nodded again. 3 days ago, I think. I ran, got lost. Your people? Dead or scattered. I don't know. Tears, real tears this time, threatened to fall. I couldn't find anyone. He stopped in front of her, crouching down to her level. This close she could smell him. Leather, wood smoke, and the wild scent of sage. His presence was overwhelming, a contained storm of power and grace. Can you walk? He asked. She tried to move her ankle and gasped, a sharp cry of pain escaping her lips. I don't think so. It's twisted. He considered this, his face a mask. What was he thinking? Was he deciding whether she was worth the trouble? Whether to just leave her here for the coyotes after all? His act of kindness could have just been a fleeting moment, a curiosity. Now came the hard reality. You will die here, he said, his voice flat, matter of fact. Cold tonight, sun tomorrow. If not that, the animals. I know, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. I've made my peace with it. Something flickered in his dark eyes. Surprise? Respect? You do not beg, he observed. Would it matter if I did? A ghost of a smile touched his lips, there and gone in an instant. No. He stood abruptly and walked back to his horse, a beautiful paint with patches of brown and white. Clara's heart sank. He was leaving. He'd given her a drink, satisfied his curiosity, and now he was going to ride away and leave her to her fate. Part of her almost wished he would. The not knowing was a torture all its own. But he didn't mount his horse. Instead, he pulled a thick wool blanket from his saddlebags. He walked back and draped it over her shoulders. It was rough and smelled of horse and smoke, but it was gloriously, unbelievably warm. Why? The word escaped her before she could stop it. He paused. Why what? Why are you helping me? She asked, her voice trembling. I'm white. I'm your enemy. Stories, he interrupted, and for the first time she heard a bitter edge in his voice. Your people tell many stories. He went back to his horse again, returning with a strip of dried meat and a small pouch that rattled. He set them down beside her. His movements were efficient, purposeful. He was a man who wasted nothing. Not time, not energy, not words. Clara watched him, her world turning upside down. The savage Apache, the merciless killer. This man was shattering a lifetime of prejudice with every quiet act of kindness. What's your name? She asked, surprising herself with the boldness of the question. He looked at her for a long, searching moment. Names have power. You do not give them to enemies. Am I your enemy? You are white. That's not what I asked, she whispered. He studied her, and she felt as if he were looking not just at her, but through her, into the very core of her soul. She felt stripped bare, her fear and her desperation and her flicker of hope all laid out for him to see. Tasu, he said finally. I am called Tasu. Clara, she offered in return. Clara Mitchell. He repeated it, the syllables sounding strange and foreign on his tongue. Clara. A coyote howled, much closer this time. Clara jumped, unable to suppress a shudder. Tazu's head snapped toward the sound, instantly alert. They smell blood, he said, and weakness. He moved away, gathering dry brush from nearby. He arranged it with practiced ease in a small pit, then produced a flint and steel from one of his pouches. Within moments, a small fire was crackling to life. The light pushed back the suffocating darkness, creating a tiny island of warmth and safety in the vast, cold desert. Fire brings men, Clara said, repeating a warning she'd heard a dozen times on the trail. Sometimes, Tazu replied, feeding small sticks into the flames. But cold and coyotes are certain. Men are only possible. He sat across the fire from her, the flames dancing between them. In the flickering light, she could see him more clearly now. She saw old scars on his arms, faint white lines that spoke of a life filled with violence. but his hands, as they gently tended the fire, were steady and careful. "Your people will look for you," he stated. Clara shook her head. "I don't think so. The survivors, if there are any, they'll have to push on to California. They can't stop. They can't risk it for one lost woman. Family? No one." The words came out choked. "I came west alone." His eyebrows rose slightly. "A woman alone. A dangerous choice." "I joined a wagon train in Independence," she explained, pulling the warm blanket tighter. "I had nothing left back east. I thought, I thought I'd find something better out here." "And did you?" She let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "I found desert and death." She gestured at him. "And you?" "Not dead yet," he observed calmly. "No," she agreed. "Not yet." They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackle of the fire and the distant call of the coyotes. Clara found herself stealing glances at him, this impossible man who defied every single thing she'd been taught. He seemed utterly at peace in the silence, his posture relaxed, but his eyes constantly scanning the darkness beyond their circle of light. He was like a panther, resting but always ready. "You speak English very well," she ventured. His jaw tightened. "Mission school, when I was young." He stared into the fire, his eyes seeing something far away. "Before I understood what they truly wanted from us." There was a story there, a deep and painful one, but she knew she had no right to ask for it. "Are there others?" she asked instead. "Other Apache nearby?" "Always," he said, and the simple word sent a chill down her spine. "This is our land. We are always here, even when you do not see us." She thought of all the times on the trail she'd felt like she was being watched, only to be laughed at by the men for being nervous. Maybe she hadn't been imagining it. Will your people kill me if they find us?" He shrugged, a simple, dispassionate movement. "Perhaps." The casual way he said it should have terrified her, but she was so far beyond simple fear now. Death had been her companion for days. At least now she was warm and had water in her belly. "But you won't," she stated, making it a fact, a plea. He looked at her across the flames, and for a moment, she saw something other than stoicism in his eyes, a deep, profound weariness. "I have seen enough death," he said quietly. His voice dropped lower, filled with a cold, hard anger. "My family, my village, your soldiers came, with their big guns and their fire. They kill women, children, old ones." He looked directly at her, his eyes burning with a grief so raw it was like an open wound. "They say we are the savages, but they—" He stopped, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle jumped. Shame washed over Clara, hot and sickening. She'd heard of the army campaigns, of course. They were always framed as heroic deeds, taming the wilderness, bringing civilization to the godless. Looking at this man, at the unbearable pain etched onto his face, she suddenly saw those stories for the lies they were. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The words were pathetic, meaningless. He looked surprised. "You did not kill them." "No, but my people did. And I believed the stories. I thought you were monsters," he finished for her. She couldn't deny it. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the fire. "Some are," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Just as some of your people are. Men become what their pain makes them." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. Clara watched them rise and die like tiny, fleeting stars. All her certainties, all the black and white rules she'd lived by, were crumbling. "What will you do with me?" she finally asked. Tazoo added a larger branch to the fire, the flames leaping up to embrace it. "Tomorrow I will take you to water. There is a hidden spring, half a day's ride. And after that?" He shrugged again. "You choose your path. I can't walk." "You will ride." The thought of getting on a horse with her ankle made her wince, but it was 1,000 times better than the alternative. "And you? Where are you going?" "Hunting," he said simply. Somehow she didn't think he was hunting for deer. The night deepened. The stars wheeled overhead, cold and indifferent. Clara found herself fighting sleep, the warmth, the water, the bit of food. It was all conspiring to pull her under. But she was afraid. Afraid that if she closed her eyes, she would wake up and he'd be gone. That this whole incredible encounter was just a dying hallucination. Sleep, Tazoo said, as if he could read her mind. I will watch. I can't. A corner of his mouth twitched. You think I save you only to kill you in your sleep? It would be a waste of good water. Despite everything, Clara felt her own lips curve into a weak smile. When you put it that way, she lay down, pulling the blanket tight. The ground was hard, but after the last 3 days it felt like a featherbed. Through heavy lids she watched him across the fire. He sat like a statue carved from the rock of the desert itself, his profile sharp against the flames. Every warning she had ever received screamed that she should be terrified. She was injured, helpless, and completely at the mercy of an Apache warrior. But as sleep finally dragged her down into its dark embrace, the only thing she felt was a strange, profound sense of safety. For the first time since the world had ended, she wasn't alone. And against all logic, against all reason, she trusted the man who had emerged from the darkness. Her last coherent thought was a sense of wonder. She had come west looking for a new life. Maybe, just maybe, she had found it. But it was nothing like she could have ever imagined. Clara woke to the harsh sound of voices. Not Tazoo's voice. Several voices speaking in a language that sounded like stones grinding together. Her eyes flew open. Panic, cold and immediate, seized her. The morning sun was just beginning to touch the tops of the rocks, painting the desert in soft shades of pink and gold. Tazoo was on his feet, standing between her and 3 other Apache warriors. They were all armed. They all looked hard and unforgiving, and they were all staring at her. The newcomer's expressions ranged from cold curiosity to outright hostility. One, an older man with streaks of gray in his long hair, pointed a finger at her and said something that sounded like a sharp accusation. Tazoo responded calmly, his voice low and steady, but Clara saw that his hand was resting on the hilt of his knife. The argument went on for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only a few minutes. The tension was so thick she could barely breathe. These were the men from the stories. These were the men she was supposed to fear. And they were looking at her like she was something foul, something that needed to be cleansed from their land. Finally, the 3 warriors seemed to reach a decision. Without another word to Tazoo, they mounted their horses, but as they rode away, they cast one last dark look in her direction, a look that promised trouble. Tazoo watched them go, his body rigid with tension. He didn't relax until they were just specks in the distance. Your friends don't approve, Clara said, her voice hoarse from sleep. They are not wrong to question me, he said, turning back to her. His face was grim. Come, we ride now, before they change their minds. The sun was climbing, and the brief morning coolness was already starting to fade. Tazoo helped her stand, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out as a jolt of agony shot up her leg from her ankle. It was worse this morning, swollen and purple. Before she could protest, Tazoo lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. The movement was so swift, so effortless, that she didn't even have time to be startled. He placed her gently on the back of his paint horse, then swung up behind her. She stiffened as he settled in, his body pressed against hers. The necessary intimacy of it was shocking. His chest was solid against her back, his arms on either side of her as he took the reins. Relax, he said, his voice a low rumble right beside her ear. It is a long ride. You will fall if you stay rigid like a stone. She forced her muscles to unclench, though she was painfully aware of his presence, of the heat of his body, of the quiet strength in the arms that now surrounded her. The horse began to walk, its steps sure and steady on the rocky ground. They rode in silence as the sun climbed higher, beating down on them. The desert, which had seemed so dead and empty, revealed itself to be teeming with life. Lizards scurried across sun-baked rocks. A roadrunner darted between scraggly bushes. High above, a hawk circled on invisible currents of air. Tazoo would occasionally point things out. The fresh track of a javelina in the dust. A tiny owl's nest hidden in the spiny arms of a cholla cactus. The distant plume of dust that meant a herd of wild horses was on the move. He was reading the land like a book written in a language she was only just beginning to understand. By midday, the heat was a physical weight. Sweat soaked through her torn dress. Even with the water Tazoo offered her periodically, she felt lightheaded and weak. Just when she thought she couldn't stand it another moment, he guided the horse down into a narrow, winding canyon. Instantly, the temperature dropped. The high rock walls on either side provided blessed shade. They rode deeper into the canyon, the walls rising like ancient, silent guardians. And then she heard it. A sound so beautiful it made her want to weep. The sound of water. The spring was a small miracle, a splash of impossible green hidden in a grove of cottonwood trees. Clear, cool water bubbled up from between moss-covered rocks, forming a small, pristine pool before vanishing back into the sandy earth. Tazoo dismounted and lifted her down, setting her gently on a flat rock beside the water. "Drink, wash, rest," he said, already moving to tend to his horse. Clara didn't need to be told twice. She cupped the cold, sweet water in her hands and drank until her stomach ached. She splashed it on her face, her arms, her neck. The cool relief on her sunburned skin was heavenly. She looked down at herself, at the filthy, torn dress, the scratched hands, the swollen, blistered feet. She barely recognized the proper young woman who had left Missouri with such high hopes. That woman was gone, stripped away by the desert. Tazoo built a small, smokeless fire in a ring of stones that showed this place had been used as a campsite for generations. He produced more dried meat from his saddlebags and a hard, flat bread. To her surprise, he also pulled out a small blackened pot. He filled it with water from the spring, set it on the fire, and began adding dried plants and leaves from one of his many pouches. "Medicine," he explained, seeing her curious look, "for the pain, for the healing." While the tea brewed, he examined her ankle. His hands, which she knew could be so deadly, were surprisingly gentle. The swelling was angry and dark. He soaked strips of clean cloth in the cool spring water and wrapped them snugly around the injury. The immediate relief was incredible. "Not broken," he concluded, his dark eyes serious. "But it is a bad sprain. You need to rest. For many days." "Many days?" Panic flared. "I can't stay here for many days. I need to find a town. I need to find my own people." "The nearest white town is Fort Grant," he said, handing her a cup of the medicinal tea. It smelled of sage and something else, something bitter. "4 days' ride, maybe 5. You cannot walk. You cannot ride alone." She sipped the tea, grimacing at the taste. But as a strange, pleasant numbness began to spread from her stomach, easing the throbbing in her ankle, she kept drinking. "Then what do I do?" she asked, her voice laced with desperation. He didn't answer right away. He was busy turning the strips of meat over the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful, measured. "There is another way," he said slowly. "My mother's sister, she married a Mexican man. They have a small ranch, 2 days south of here. They might help you." "Might?" The word hung in the air. "They fear trouble," he admitted. "A white woman brings questions. Brings soldiers, maybe." He handed her a piece of the warm bread. "But my Aunt Maria, she has a soft heart. She would not turn away someone who needs help." Clara considered it. A Mexican ranch was a world away from Fort Grant, but it was infinitely better than dying in this canyon. Still, it was the unknown. It was dangerous. "And you?" she asked. "What will you do?" "I have business to the north," he said. The way he said it, the cold finality in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. His business was war. His business was vengeance. She found to her surprise that she didn't want to know the details. She didn't want to picture him as a killer. She wanted to hold on to the image of the man who had shared his water with her. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the shade of the cottonwoods. Tazoo became a teacher. He showed her which plants could be eaten and which would kill. He showed her how to find water by watching the flight patterns of birds. He taught her the Apache words for water, for fire, for danger. "Why are you telling me all this?" she asked as he explained how to get moisture from a cactus without getting poisoned. He looked at her, his expression serious. "The desert does not care if you are white or Apache. It kills all who are foolish. It is better that you know." As the day cooled, he fashioned a clever trap from woven grass and caught 2 small fish from the pool. They cooked them over the fire, And Clara thought she had never tasted anything so delicious in her entire life. The simple meal, the cool water, the life-giving shade, it was a feast. I had a sister, Tazu said suddenly, his voice quiet. He was staring into the fire, but his eyes were seeing a different time, a different place. She was younger than me, always asking questions, like you. The past tense of his words hung between them, heavy and sharp. Clara waited, sensing he had more to say. Soldiers came to our winter camp, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, which was somehow more chilling than if he had shouted. We were at peace. We had papers from the government agent. It did not matter. His hands resting on his knees, clenched into fists. She was out gathering piñon nuts with the other children. The soldiers, they rode them down, for sport, like hunting rabbits. Oh, God, Clara breathed, her hand flying to her mouth. Tazu, I'm so sorry. Your God was not there that day, he said, the bitterness back in his voice. Neither were our spirits. I was away hunting. When I returned, there was only smoke and death. I found her by the creek. She was still holding her little basket. Tears were streaming down Clara's face now. Tears for a girl she'd never known. Tears for the boy who'd had to find her. No wonder he hated her people. No wonder his friends had looked at her with such contempt. How? She whispered. How can you help me after what my people did to you? He finally looked at her, his eyes dark pools of ancient pain. And in their depths, she saw something else. Not forgiveness, something harder, something earned. Hate is a heavy thing to carry, he said. For many seasons I carried it. It poisoned my food, it poisoned my water. It made me like them. It made me a killer who saw only the color of a person's skin, not the person. He touched his chest. My sister, she would not have wanted that for me. She loved everything. Birds, flowers, even the little lizards she would try to make into pets. She sounds wonderful, Clara whispered. She was light in a dark place, he said. He looked at her again, his gaze intense. When I saw you by that rock, you were ready to die, but you were not begging. You had courage. He shrugged, a gesture that seemed inadequate for the weight of his words. Perhaps the spirit sent you. Perhaps it was only chance. But in that moment, I chose to see my sister's heart, not the soldier's guns. They fell into a long silence as darkness settled into the canyon. The spring gurgled softly. An owl hooted from the high branches of a cottonwood. Clara felt something inside her shifting, breaking apart, rearranging itself into a new shape. All her life she had seen the world in black and white. Settlers were good. Indians were bad. Civilized and savage. But sitting here across a small fire from a man who had every reason in the world to hate her, to kill her, she was seeing for the first time all the shades of gray. I misjudged your people, she said softly. The stories, the fear. I never thought. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. And you are not what I expected either. What did you expect? I expected screaming, pleading. I expected a weak woman who would die without a fight. He looked at her. I did not expect a Mitchell woman. The way he said it, echoing her mother's words, sent a strange warmth through her. We are what we choose to be, he said, his voice a low murmur. Your people, my people. We all make choices. Some choose the path of hate. Some try to find a different path. And you chose to save me. I chose to see a person, not just a white woman, he corrected her. He held her gaze and she felt the weight of his next words. The question is, Clara Mitchell, what do you choose now? It was a fair question. She could demand he take her to Fort Grant, back to the world she knew, the world of black and white certainties. Or she could trust him. She could take this different path he was offering, a path that led south, to a Mexican ranch, to a world of gray. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Everything I thought I knew was wrong. The stories we tell ourselves about who is good and who is evil, it's not that simple, is it? Nothing in this land is simple, he said. A mountain can be shelter or a trap. The rain can bring life or a deadly flood. A man, He paused. A man can be a protector or a destroyer. It all depends. She watched him in the firelight, this warrior who spoke with the soul of a philosopher. What made you choose to be a protector? For a long time, he confessed, I was a destroyer. Rage made it easy, but rage is a fire that burns everything, even the one who carries it. One day I found a Mexican family trapped by a flash flood. I could have left them. They were enemies too, but I remembered my sister, how she would rescue injured birds. So I pulled them to safety. The look in the children's eyes, it was like seeing the sun after a long, dark night. And that changed you. It began a change, he clarified. It is slow, like water wearing down stone. I still have the anger, but I try to choose a better way. He looked at her meaningfully, like now. Clara felt overwhelmed. He was trusting her with pieces of his broken heart. She had come west looking for a new beginning, never imagining it would mean sitting by a hidden spring with an Apache warrior, having her entire soul dismantled and rebuilt. Your aunt's ranch, she said finally. Tell me more about it. His expression seemed to lighten, just a little. It is a small place. They raise goats, grow corn. Maria makes the best tortillas in the whole territory. Her husband, Miguel, is a quiet man, but he is kind. They have 3 children, all of them as wild as young coyotes. And they'll really help me? Maria will fuss over you like a mother hen, he said, a genuine smile touching his lips for the first time. She collects strays, injured dogs, lost cats, broken people. You will fit right in. Despite the gravity of her situation, Clara smiled back. Is that what I am? A stray? We are all strays in this land, he said softly. Some of us just pretend we are not. The fire burned low. She told him about her life in Missouri, about the farm she couldn't inherit because she was a woman, about the loveless marriage proposal she was running from. He told her about the old days before the soldiers came, when his people were free. They were stories from 2 different worlds, but in the telling, the distance between those worlds seemed to shrink. When she finally lay down to sleep, wrapped in his blanket, she felt a peace that made no sense. Her ankle still throbbed. Her future was a terrifying blank. But she wasn't alone. And the man watching over her, this supposed savage, had shown her a depth of kindness and honor that shamed many of her own kind. Tazoo, she said softly into the darkness. Yes, thank you for everything, for seeing me. He was quiet for so long, she thought he hadn't heard. Then his deep voice came out of the shadows. And thank you, Clara Mitchell, he said, for letting me remember who I choose to be. She closed her eyes, listening to the murmuring spring and the whisper of the wind in the cottonwoods. Tomorrow would bring a new journey, new dangers, new choices. But tonight, in this hidden oasis, with this impossible protector, she felt the first stirrings of something she thought she had lost forever. Hope. The storm hit on their second day of travel, a violent, sudden fury that turned the sky from a placid blue to a bruised purple in minutes. One moment they were riding under a hot sun. The next, a wall of dark clouds was racing toward them, spitting lightning. Hold on, Tazoo said, his voice tense behind her. His arm tightened around her waist as he urged the horse into a desperate gallop. The first raindrops were as big as coins, splattering against the hot rocks with a sizzle. The wind rose to a howl, driving sand and rain into their faces. Thunder crashed, a deafening explosion that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. Tazoo spotted a cluster of massive boulders and guided the horse into the small bit of shelter they offered just as the heavens opened up. The rain came down in a solid, blinding sheet. He leaped from the horse, pulling her down with him. She cried out as her injured ankle twisted, but he was already half carrying her, pushing her into the most protected spot, a small overhang against the largest rock. He threw his wool blanket over both of them, creating a tiny, cramped tent against the stone. The temperature had plummeted, and Clara was instantly shivering, her soaked dress clinging to her like a second skin. Here, Tazoo said, his voice urgent. He pulled her back against his chest, wrapping his arms around her, sharing his body heat. It is the only way. She didn't protest. Propriety was a luxury for a world she no longer inhabited. She huddled against his warmth, feeling the steady, strong beat of his heart against her back. The storm raged around their small shelter. Lightning bleached the world white, followed by immediate, bone-jarring thunder. The desert floor was quickly turning into a series of rushing, muddy rivers. "I've never seen anything like it," she shouted over the roar. "Desert storms are fierce," he shouted back, his voice a warm vibration against her. But they pass quickly. They huddled in silence, listening to the symphony of destruction. Clara became intensely aware of every point of contact between them, his powerful arms holding her secure, her back pressed against the solid wall of his chest, his chin resting lightly on the top of her head. It was the closest she had ever been to any man, and despite the terrifying violence of the storm, she felt a profound sense of safety. Gradually, she realized she had stopped shivering. His warmth had seeped into her, chasing away the cold. She could smell the rain on his leather clothes, the scent of sage, and something else that was uniquely, intoxicatingly him. "Clara," he said, his voice suddenly soft, right by her ear. She turned her head to look at him and found his face was only inches from her own. Rain had plastered his black hair to his forehead, and droplets ran down his angular cheeks. His dark eyes, usually so guarded, were wide and intense, holding an emotion she couldn't name but felt in the pit of her stomach. She started to say, but she didn't know what the words were. Another flash of lightning lit his face, and in that stark, momentary illumination, she saw him. Not as an Apache warrior, not as a savior or a threat, but simply as Tazoo, a man who had suffered, who had chosen kindness over hate, and who was looking at her as if she were the only person in the world. She didn't know who moved first. Maybe they both did. As thunder cracked directly overhead, his lips met hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was like the storm itself, full of lightning and thunder, and a desperate, undeniable need. It was a kiss born of shared danger and impossible circumstances of two worlds colliding. All the unspoken things that had been growing between them since that first night, the gratitude, the respect, the fascination, erupted in that single moment. Her hands came up to cup his face, feeling the rough stubble on his jaw, the surprising softness of his wet hair. This was nothing like the chaste, clumsy kisses she had received from suitors in Missouri. This was fire. This was a revelation. It felt like coming home to a country she had never known existed. When they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. Tazoo rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "This is dangerous," he whispered, his voice ragged. "I know," she breathed. "My people, they would cast me out for this. Yours would hang me. I know." He pulled back slightly, his dark eyes searching hers. "You deserve better, Clara. A good man. A safe life. Not a warrior with blood on his hands and no future to offer you." Tears mixed with the rain on her face. "And you deserve better than a lost white woman who brings you nothing but trouble and danger." A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his usually severe features. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Then we are well matched," he said. A laugh bubbled up out of her, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy in the midst of the chaos. He joined her, his deep laughter a sound she knew she would never forget. For that one perfect moment, there was no danger, no prejudice, no impossible future. There were only two people finding light in the heart of a storm. As the rain began to ease and the thunder rolled off into the distance, they didn't move apart. The world outside their small shelter might be hostile and unforgiving, but in here, they had created something precious. "What happens now?" Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Now," he said, his eyes still holding hers, "we survive the storm. Tomorrow, we continue to my aunt's ranch." "That's not what I meant." "I know," he said softly. "For many years I have walked alone. I thought my heart was a stone, buried with my family. Then you appear in the desert, and the stone begins to crack." "You were the storm," she said. "You came from nowhere and changed everything in my world." "Storms pass," he said. "This won't," she stated, a certainty blooming in her heart. This felt different. This felt like fate. He touched her face, his calloused thumb gently wiping away a raindrop from her cheek. My people say the spirits guide our feet to the path we are meant to walk, even when the path is rocky and dangerous. My mother used to say that God works in mysterious ways, she replied. I never really understood what that meant, until now. The rain slowed to a drizzle. Shafts of sunlight broke through the clouds, painting the wet desert in glittering shades of silver and gold. Steam rose from the hot rocks. Reluctantly, they separated. The world rushed back in. Tazoo helped her to a dry patch of ground and quickly built a fire, using tinder he'd kept dry in a waterproof pouch. They sat by the flames drying their clothes, the comfortable silence between them now charged with a new, thrilling energy. He had taken off his shirt to wring it out, and she saw the scars that crisscrossed his chest and back. A long, puckered line along his ribs, a round, deep scar on his shoulder. Will you tell me? She asked softly. He looked down at his body as if noticing the marks for the first time. This, he said, touching the mark on his ribs, was a gift from a cavalry saber. This, he pointed to his shoulder, from a Mexican bandit's bullet. These smaller ones, he traced faint lines on his arms, are from the mission school, from the whips they used when we spoke our own tongue. Each story was delivered without self-pity, but Clara felt every blow. She thought of her own scars, the invisible ones etched on her soul by loss and loneliness. We are both marked, she said quietly. All people are, he replied, pulling his damp shirt back on. Some marks show, some do not. As the afternoon wore on, they rode through a transformed world. The rain had awakened the desert. Hidden flowers burst into bloom, carpeting the ground in brilliant splashes of purple, yellow, and red. The air smelled clean and alive. The kiss had changed everything. The careful distance was gone, replaced by an unspoken understanding. When they made camp that evening, the space between them felt different. It was no longer a divide, but a connection. Do you regret it? She asked as they sat by the fire, the stars beginning to appear in the clean-washed sky. The kiss. He looked at her, his expression serious. I regret many things in my life, Clara Mitchell. That is not one of them. Even though it makes everything harder, some things, he said, his voice low and intense, are worth the difficulty. He held her gaze. Do you? No, she said without a moment's hesitation. It was like coming alive after being asleep for a very long time. Yes, he agreed simply. Like that. Tell me, she said later, as the fire burned down to glowing embers. Tell me about the hidden places, the places where people like us could be together. He grew quiet, staring into the flames. There are a few, he said finally. Valleys hidden deep in the mountains, places the soldiers have not yet found. Places where people do not care about the color of your skin, only the strength of your heart. An Apache man married to a Mexican woman, a white trader who took a Navajo wife, others who have been cast out from both worlds. He looked at her. It is not an easy life. There is no safety there, but there is peace. The idea was a seed of impossible hope, a place where they wouldn't have to hide, a place where they could just be. Would you want that? She asked carefully. That kind of life. He was silent for a long time. I have been a warrior for so long, I do not know if I can be anything else. But with you. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers intertwining with hers. With you, I remember the man I was before the war. The boy who loved books, the brother who listened to his sister's laughter. You make me want to be more than what my pain has made me. Tears welled in her eyes. You make me brave, she whispered. Before you, I was just running away. Now I feel like I could run to something. Even if that something goes against everything you were ever taught. Especially then, she said firmly. Everything I was taught led me here, to this moment. Maybe it's time for new lessons. He smiled, that rare, breathtaking smile. He raised her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. My people have a saying, he murmured against her skin. The heart knows the path, even when the eyes are blind. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he put his arm around her, holding her close. They sat like that for a long time, watching the fire die, the future an uncertain, terrifying, and beautiful possibility. The world would call them enemies. Their own people would call them traitors. But here, under the vast and silent desert sky, they were just a man and a woman who had found each other against all odds. And they were choosing to walk the heart's path, no matter where it led. They reached Maria's ranch at sunset. It was a humble place, a small cluster of adobe buildings huddled around a well, surrounded by goat pens and a field of corn. The sound of children's laughter drifted on the evening air. A woman emerged from the main house as they approached, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. She was stout and strong, with threads of silver in her black hair and kind, knowing eyes. Her face broke into a wide smile when she saw Tazoo, but her eyes narrowed with sharp concern when she saw Clara riding with him. "Nephew!" she called out in Spanish, her voice warm but laced with curiosity. "What stray have you brought to my door this time?" Tazoo slid off the horse and reached up to help Clara down, his hands gentle on her waist. "She needs help, Tia Maria. She was lost in the desert, injured." Maria's shrewd gaze swept over Clara, taking in the torn dress, the crudely wrapped ankle, the exhaustion etched on her face. But her eyes saw more than that. They saw the way Tazoo's hand lingered on Clara's back a moment too long. They saw the way Clara looked at him, a look of profound trust and something deeper. "Dios mío," Maria muttered under her breath. Then louder she said, "Well, don't just stand there in the dust. Bring her inside. Miguel, we have guests." The house was cool and clean, the air thick with the delicious smell of chili and fresh tortillas. Maria bustled Clara into a chair, firing off rapid-fire instructions in Spanish to her husband, Miguel, a quiet, weathered man with kind eyes. In minutes, Clara's foot was propped up on a stool, a cup of hot, sweet coffee was in her hands, and Maria was skillfully unwrapping Tazoo's bandage to examine the swollen ankle. 3 days in the desert, Maria clucked, shaking her head. "You are lucky that foolish nephew of mine found you. You are lucky to be alive." "He saved my life," Clara said, her eyes finding Tazoo, who lingered near the doorway, looking uncomfortable and out of place inside the four walls of a house. "Did he now?" Maria's tone was non-committal, but her eyes were sharp. She rewrapped the ankle with clean bandages and a soothing herbal salve. "And where does he plan to take you from here?" "I thought perhaps Fort Grant," Tazoo said from the doorway, "once she has rested." Maria stood up, placing her hands on her hips and giving her nephew a look that could curdle milk. "Fort Grant? 4 days from here? Through Apache territory? With a lone white woman? Have you lost what little sense the spirits gave you, boy?" Miguel came over and quietly guided Tazoo outside, speaking to him in low, urgent Spanish. Maria watched them go, then pulled a chair up and sat directly in front of Clara. "All right, child," she said, her voice softer now. "You want to tell me the real story?" I I don't understand," Clara stammered. "I have known that boy since he was a child," Maria said, her gaze unwavering. "I have seen him bring home injured hawks, orphaned wolf pups, even a half-dead coyote once. I have never seen him bring home a white woman." She leaned forward. "Something happened out there in that desert. Something more than a simple rescue." Clara felt a hot blush creep up her neck. This woman saw right through her. "He has been nothing but honorable," Clara insisted. "I do not doubt his honor," Maria said. "But I have eyes. I see the way you look at each other, like two storm clouds about to collide." She patted Clara's hand, her expression softening. "I am not judging you, Nina. I married a man my people called an enemy. But you must understand the path you're walking. That boy out there, he has seen too much death. His heart is a fortress. And now you come along and knock on the gate." Over the next few days, Clara healed under Maria's tender and bossy care. The ranch was a haven of peaceful, hard-working life. Maria's 3 children, initially shy, soon adopted Clara, bringing her wildflowers and teaching her Spanish words in exchange for stories. Tazoo kept a respectful distance during the day, helping Miguel mend fences and herd the goats. But every evening after the children were asleep, he would come and sit with her on the porch, under the vast, starry sky. They would talk for hours, their voices low, sharing stories of their 2 different worlds. "Maria knows," Clara said one night. Maria knows everything, Tazoo replied with a faint smile. She says you look at me like a person dying of thirst looks at a cool spring. What did you tell her? The truth, he said, his voice dropping. That you make me want a future I do not believe I can have. The words were a bittersweet ache in Clara's chest. Every day she spent here, in this peaceful limbo, made the thought of leaving, of returning to her own world, more impossible. That world would never understand what had happened between them. Maybe we can have it, she said softly. Maybe wanting it is the first step. He took her hand, his fingers strong and warm around hers. Your ankle is almost healed, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Soon you will have to choose, Clara. She had been dreading this. I know. From here, Fort Grant is 3 days to the east. There is a stagecoach line there. You could find safe passage to California. California. The word sounded like it belonged to another lifetime, to another woman. A life of safety and comfort, yes, but it would be a life of looking over her shoulder, of comparing every man she met to the ghost of an Apache warrior. It would be a life of quiet desperation. Or, he continued, his voice barely a whisper, the hidden valley I told you of is 3 days to the south. It is not an easy life. It is a life of hard work and constant watchfulness. But we would be together. He paused. If that is what you want. Clara turned to face him, to look directly into his searching eyes. What do you want, Tazoo? Not what is practical, not what is safe. What does your heart want? His grip on her hand tightened. I want to wake up in the morning and see your face beside me. I want to teach you the name of every star in the Apache sky. I want to build a home with my own hands, a place of peace, not a place of war. He stopped, struggling for the words. I want to be the man you make me remember I can be. Tears stung Clara's eyes. Then why are we even talking about Fort Grant? Because I will not have you choose this life out of gratitude or out of fear, he said fiercely. I want you to choose it with your eyes open. A real choice. Before she could answer, the sound of approaching horses cut through the night. Fast. Too fast for friendly visitors. Instantly, Tasu was on his feet, his hand on his knife, his body a coiled spring of deadly readiness. Miguel appeared in the doorway, holding an old rifle. 3 riders emerged from the darkness. They were white men, their faces hard and cruel in the moonlight, their clothes caked with dust. Bounty hunters, Indian fighters, the kind of men who shot first and never asked questions at all. Clara's blood ran cold. Evening, the lead rider said, his voice a low growl. His hand was resting casually on the butt of his pistol. We're looking for a white woman. Got herself lost from a wagon train a week or so back. Heard an Apache might have been involved. Maria stepped out onto the porch, calm as could be, wiping her hands on her apron as if she were merely greeting neighbors. No white women here, senor. Just my family. The man's cold eyes scanned the porch, lingering for a fraction of a second on Clara, who sat half hidden in the shadows. That's so. Well, we've been tracking a band of Apache raiders for days. The ones who hit that wagon train, lost their trail near here. You folks seen any hostiles about? While he spoke, Tazoo melted backward into the deeper shadows of the house, disappearing like a ghost. Clara knew his presence would be a death sentence for everyone here. We see many people pass through, Maria said smoothly. This is a peaceful ranch. We do not ask questions. Well, you should, the man sneered. That Apache buck we're tracking, there's a $500 bounty on his scalp, and we aim to collect it. He leaned forward in his saddle, his eyes glittering with greed. I heard he might have taken the woman captive. If you happen to see him, or her, there'd be a reward in it for you. If I see anyone, I will be sure to send word, Maria promised. The man stared at her for a long, tense moment. Then he shrugged. All right, then. He turned his horse to leave, then paused. Oh, and ma'am, you should know. The Army's put out a new order. Anyone caught harboring a hostile Apache, well, that's a hanging offense. He smiled, a chilling, humorless expression, and then he and his men rode off into the night. No one moved until the sound of their hoofbeats had completely faded. Inside, Maria commanded, her voice shaking with fury. Now! Once the doors were barred, she rounded on them. This is what you bring to my door. Death. This is the life you want, nephew. I am sorry, Tia, Tazu said, his face a grim mask. Sorry does not stop a bullet. Those men will be back. They smelled something. They will not give up. She looked at Tazu, her eyes filled with a fierce, protective love. You must leave. Tonight. Not without her, Tazu said, his gaze locked on Clara. Then take her, Maria cried. Take her and go, before you get us all killed. Clara's mind was racing. The choice was no longer a philosophical one. It was here. It was now. Stay and endanger this kind family. Try for Fort Grant and risk running into those men on the road. The valley, she said, her voice clear and steady. Take me to the hidden valley. Tazu's eyes searched hers one last time. It is a hard road. We will be hunted. Our road has been hard from the moment we met, she replied, and we are already hunted. Maria threw her hands up in despair. You are both insane. A white woman and an Apache warrior running off into the wilderness together? What kind of life is that? Clara looked from Maria's worried face to Tazu's hopeful one. A chosen one, she said. It's my choice. Within the hour they were gone. Maria, despite her anger, packed them food and supplies. Miguel gave Clara a sturdy, gentle mare. As Clara was about to mount, Maria pulled her into a fierce hug. You take care of that foolish boy, she whispered in Clara's ear. He acts like he is made of stone, but his heart has been broken too many times. I will, Clara promised. They rode out under a moonless sky, heading south into the wilderness. The bounty hunters were behind them. Tazu's own people had cast him out. Ahead lay a life of uncertainty and danger. But for the first time since she'd left Missouri, Clara felt like she was no longer running from something. She was running to her future. She reached over and took Tazu's hand. He squeezed it, a silent promise in the darkness. They were outcasts. They were fugitives. But they were together. And for now, that was enough.